Good morning, Friday, July 26th, 2024, or the 2024th year of our Lord, Anno Domini. Good morning to you. Welcome to this final episode of this week's series on what happens. Let me bring this to your screen. What happens if Donald Trump wins another term? So we've been talking the whole week about this possibility, which is, again, the one that is a real or closest to reality in front of our eyes, in our horizon. Yesterday, we had finally the Obamas, both Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, finally endorsing Kamala Harris. They were very resistant toward doing that, and they finally did. So the Democrat Party is once again absolutely united. Of course, democracy never meant anything to those people. Everything they say with their mouth, they're doing with their actions. Their words never match their behaviors. So that's where you go. Joe Biden was stolen, right? He had his candidacy completely busted off. He was kicked out. He was forced out after 14 million citizens had voted for him. This is what they do, and we should be used to their modes and their practices right now. But that's not our topic here today. We're going to be talking about this possibility, which is the one that is closest to reality, that Trump is going to be elected now against Kamala Harris. All the polls are already saying that they are very, very close. They're going to pump her up so that whatever strange votes in the night that they bring to the table are not a shock in the very next morning on November the 6th, as they did in 2020. So we know there's shenanigans. We know what probably is going to happen. There's the illegal immigrant vote this year. So they are going to come up with something. They have a plan. We know that. But I believe that this time, somehow the Republicans will. It is true that the Republicans have been fixing a lot of the voter problems, voter roll calls. They've been working hard. Many Republicans, many people like Charlie Kirk, people that forgot her name. She is amazing. She's been doing this for a long time. So there is a real possibility that all of the machinery of the Democrat Party is not going to work this year. That's my point here. So with that said, let us go for the final episode on the series, What Happens If Donald Trump Comes Back to the White House. We've been seeing this and talking about this is going to be a pivotal moment between globalism and nationalism, and it's very clear where Trump is planning to lead or to head this boat, this ship to nationalism, not to globalism anymore. So I showed this to you on Tuesday and then on Wednesday and Thursday, how somehow globalism, because of the withdrawal of the United States of America from global markets and the global economy and the global politics and the global geopolitics, somehow this ship has been coming back to the nationalist arena. So this is a big option or a big moment to choose right now. But we already know, we have already seen which one of the two Trump is going to decide on. And he is in total favor of nationalism, make America great again, America first, which means that globalism somehow, without the United States of America, globalism just collapses. And this is what we're going to see today. I'm going to show you a video from Peter Zion himself. He is the author of, I had the book here, I don't have it anymore. So the book is The End of the World is Just the Beginning, Mapping the Collapse of Globalism or Globalization. And I want him to tell you directly how he came to this conclusion of a deglobalized world, pretty much summing up in 10 minutes what his analysis and his reasons are behind his study, his academic and professional study. Let me show that to you, and I come back in 10 minutes just to wrap this thing up. About the video, Peter Zion does a lot of these videos, and I think it's just cool. It's just amazing. He goes to a place, he likes to walk every morning. So he walks long, distances, miles and miles. And he is doing this video as he walks in a winter day in Colorado, where he lives, Colorado mountains. And he lives there, and he is going to be talking like somebody that is walking, and you see that he's going to be gasping for air sometimes. But again, stay with him. It's annoying to me individually, particularly annoying, but I try to take that out of the equation and pay attention and focus on the contents of what he's been talking about. So let's do that. Let me bring this video here. Here we go.
Zion here, coming to you from Colorado. Today I wanted to answer a couple of questions that folks had, namely why I'm so confident that deglobalization is past the point of return. The idea is that if the United States has benefited from globalization for so long, why, even if it was in danger, wouldn't the US just kind of double down? Three things. First, you got to look at why the United States did this in the first place. Globalization was never about the economics for the United States, or at least not about the economics in a traditional sense. The United States had the world's largest economy long before World War II. And with the war, we found all of our potential rivals, cooperation nations, friends, allies, enemies, everybody put together had an economy that was about the same size as the United States. And economic growth was hard to come by. Economic security was impossible. And a big part of what led to that was competition over resources, over lands, over security, basically all of the things that have colored human history since the beginning. So, the Americans came to the conclusion that when they were facing down Stalin in the middle of Europe, that there was no way that Americans would be able to economically, politically support the kind of conflict where the Soviets were right there and we were an ocean away. Especially when we'd be fighting on the territory of countries that had been absolutely devastated. So the solution was to bribe everybody, to use our Navy to patrol the global oceans so that any one of our allies could go anywhere at any time and interact with any other player, access any material, and especially access the American market, which was really the only one of size to survive the war. The catch was you had to let the Americans write your security policies. And so never forget that from the very beginning, the very concept of globalization for the United States was never about economics or trade. It was about security. We pay you to be on our side. And that worked. And after 40, 45 years, the Cold War ended because the Soviet system could not compete, because the Americans not only held the security upper hand, but had created this alliance of economies that were massively larger. Because by the time we got to the 1980s, Korea, which had been the world's 5th poorest country in per capita terms, actually surpassed that of the Soviet Union. So there was just no long-term competition to be had. Now, that was 30, 35 years ago. And since then, the world has changed. We've entered into a hyperglobalization era where any number of other players have come into the global system and participated under the rules the US set up. And this means it's not just the West and it's not just the Asian protectorates, but it's Southeast Asia. It's Brazil, it's India, it's Russia itself, and of course China. We're no longer in a world where the US economy is as large as everybody else put together. Based on how you do the math, the rest of the world combined is 3 or 4 times the size of the United States. So doing an indirect economic subsidization, as the US had for 45 years, became less and less tenable over the next 30. And we're now in an environment where some of these countries, China for the most part, are so overextended and so dependent on globalization that the only way they can survive is as the United States increases support, not decreases. Their demographics mean they have no market. Their lack of military reach, it means they can't get energy. And their dependence on the Russians means that the country that is most likely to use economics, especially raw material supply, in order to achieve geopolitical concessions is now their single largest partner. Newsflash, that's not going to end well. Okay, so that's kind of piece one. The idea of globalization is no longer benefiting the United States because we've never viewed it the same way as everyone else. But there's a couple other reasons to think of. First, American politics. During the Cold War, we had a pretty strong bipartisan foreign policy. Remember that American foreign policy is a reflection of its domestic policy. And every generation or two, Americans go through and kind of refabricate what their parties mean. This is part of the side effect of having a first past the post single member district system, which is a fancy way of saying that you vote for a candidate who's going to represent a specific geographic area. And they have to get more votes than whoever comes in second. So the parties have a vested interest in throwing as wide of a net as possible so they can get that extra marginal vote. Well, every few decades, politics shifts because demographics change and economics change and security changes. And if you think about what we've been through in the last 35 years, the Cold War has ended, hyperglobalization has risen, hyperglobalization has fallen. The baby boomers were in their prime, the baby boomers are now retiring. We've had the information revolution, we've had social media. Of course we're going to handle our politics different. And when you do that, the factions that make up the parties move around. Remember, big net, big tent parties. That means they've got lots of factions that are always struggling for dominance and influence. When politics shifts, those factional alliances don't make sense anymore, and so they have to evolve. And the politics don't just rise and fall within the big tent party, they fall out, they shift sides. And if you look at what has happened so far, none of it supports globalization. So, for example, unions have largely fallen out of the Democratic coalition. The Trump coalition was fairly successful at drawing them out. They are very anti-free trade. The Trump administration also kicked the business community and the national security conservatives out of the Republican coalition. Those were the two factions for economic and security reasons that were most in favor of globalization. And so now we've got the Biden administration and a Trump-led Republican coalition that is basically having a tug of war for the unions. So it's just like we can't have a conversation about immigration in the United States because the unions don't want to have it. No one in Washington wants to talk about globalization in a positive light because the unions are at stake in terms of which political alignment they're going to take. And the two groups that used to like globalization, national security and business conservatives, they're not even part of the room anymore. But probably the biggest reason is the third one, and that's demographics. When you urbanize and industrialize, and for most of the world, they didn't start that in earnest until 1945, or in the case of the developing world, until 1992, you move off the farm, you move into the town, and instead of working on a subsistence agricultural system, you now are getting a services, a manufacturing, or an industrial job. And that means you are living in condos or single-family homes or townhomes that are crammed together. And in that sort of environment, kids go from being free labor to just being expensive headaches, and you have fewer of them. Well, for the rich world, these transitions started 75 years ago. For the developing world, they started 40 years ago. You play that forward, and the world is literally running out of people aged 20 and under, and has for 20 years now, which means now most of the world is running out of people 40 and under. Well, the whole idea of trade, the whole idea of globalization is someone has to buy this stuff. Trade makes no sense if there's nobody on the other end of the sale. And we are now entering a world where the people who traditionally have done most of the consuming, people 45 and under, the folks who are having kids and buying homes and cars, they just don't exist in the necessary numbers to sustain the system. You've undoubtedly heard from me about how the Chinese and the Russians are the two fastest aging societies in human history, but the Germans aren't far behind, and the Koreans behind that, and the Indonesians, the Indians, and the Brazilians are actually aging faster than what most of the developing world has done for the last 70 years. And you only have to fast forward to about 2040, 2045, before the average American is younger than the average Brazilian, and 10 years after that, younger than the average Indian, Indonesian, or Mexican. So we no longer have the security parameters to make this work because the Americans aren't interested. We no longer have the economic basis to make this work because we don't have enough young people to consume. And the Americans are taking a political moment for themselves that's going to last a few more years in order to digest whatever is going to happen with the unions. And that, howdy neighbor, and that is more than enough time to kill any remnants of the globalized system. What would need to happen if the United States really wanted to get back in this game is some sort of security scare that scares us more than the rest of the world, where we feel we need to pay for a new alliance. The Ukraine war is not that. If you look at what the Biden administration has done, all the deals that are on the table are on security. There's not a single guns for butter trade. In fact, every single trade war, every single tariff that the Trump administration put into place, the Biden administration has doubled and tripled down on, except for one. There has been a deal over aerospace with the Europeans, but that's it. If anything, the Biden administration is far more anti-globalization than the Trump administration was, or at a minimum, it's actually putting into long-term policy. So even if the next president happens to be a strong globalist, they're going to have to unwind 8 years of anti-globalization sentiment that is now hardwired into American policy, and another 8 years under Obama of just complete strategic apathy. You're not going to do that in 4 years. So we are talking best case scenario. If you want to be involved in a globalized system, another 6 years before the Americans might belly up back to the table. By then, China will be gone. Until next time.
So here we are. This is Peter Zeihan by Peter Zeihan. This is the guy that wrote the book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning, Mapping the Collapse of Globalization. And again, as I said before, and as I mentioned before, he is not the only one voice saying these things. He says it by the end of his 10-minute video that both Trump and Biden administrations did exactly the same, meaning being anti-globalism. I do not agree with that 100%. I see what he is doing and saying and where he's coming from, because somehow the Biden administration did not cancel a lot of the, well, he said one, but it was a lot. It was many, not several, many things that Biden just completely eliminated from the Trump administration concerning the nations, right? For example, the support for the Ukraine war, support for Ukraine in its war against Russia, Trump would have cut that like to zero. And the Biden administration keeps sending money there. They keep sending money to Iran. That would be had cut by a Trump administration, as Trump did in his 4 years. Money for countries in Africa to change their policies on LGBTQ policies, or to change their abortion or pro-life stance. The Biden administration has been sending money all across the globe in order to transform other nations. And Obama started doing that, actually, to transform other nations into like the likeness and image of the United States of America in a negative way. So Trump would have cut that like totally. He did when he was in office. And now as he returns, if that is confirmed, this is going to intensify much, much more. So with that, I would like to bring to your attention one more slide, two more slides, actually. This is a quote from his book, Peter Zeihan's book, and I would like to read it with you, and so you can have something to think about more than only his video. So this is what he says in the book. The world is entering its greatest period of change in nearly a century. America's allies depend on her commitments for their economic and physical security. The world has gotten so used to the normal of an American-dominated order, that's normal, right? Until now, that we all have forgotten the historical norm. What was the historical norm? Several smaller and competing powers and economic systems throughout Europe and Asia working. The period of American hyper-involvement in global affairs is ending, says Peter Zion. The impacts of global energy and agricultural markets, finance, and technology will be transformative, but the heirs to the dying order are not who we think. Russia, India, China, and Brazil, and South Africa here to complete the BRICS countries, will not be the superpowers of the future. Rather, names familiar and new will be taking charge of the emerging global disorder. Germany will decline as the most powerful country in Europe. He says that France is going to take Germany's place, which is very doubtful because of how France has fallen to Islam, to the Islamic idea in their country. So let's see what happens. Every country should prepare for the collapse of China, and he gave us absolutely clear reasons on why he thinks that. We are already seeing a shift in the Middle East. It's no longer Iran, the region's most dangerous threat, but Saudi Arabia. These are the emerging shifts and resulting problems and issues that will arise in the next 2 decades. We are entering a period of profound upheaval. No political or corporate leader should ignore these insights if they want to survive and thrive in this uncertain new time. So here you go, Peter Zion's words on his book. We're changing. We are a world in a change. We are in a pivotal moment of change right now. Which leads me to my final slide. If everything is changing, it means that the church will also have to think differently. For example, there are churches that I know of in the country, in the nation, already rethinking their strategies for global missions. Perhaps we are not going to have many missionaries sent to the world as we used to do in these past 70 years. Perhaps now we are going to have to focus much more on, for example, the close to 30 million illegal immigrants that we received here in the United States of America in these past 3.5 years from 169 countries of the world, meaning that right now the harvest is right here. Somehow God brought the ones who are to be saved to our shorelines, to our land. So there are some churches already changing the perspectives on missions. I don't believe that global missions will end at all. I believe that global missions are going to be much more dangerous from now on, because the global order, if everything that we talked about this week happens, and it looks like it is going to happen, the world is not going to be anymore under American mindset or worldview based on Christianity anymore. So the world is going to be a more dangerous place for missionaries, as it used to be in the past, 100 years and earlier, right? But right now we have a chance, we have an opportunity to evangelize every single soul that crossed our border in the past 3.5 years, let's say in the past 10 years, right? We have close to 30 million illegal immigrants here that need Christ, that are in need of the gospel. And this is our time to work, and work very, very hard. So all of that to say that the world is not the same anymore. Our children are not going to live in the same world. And what I'm planning to do perhaps next week is to bring another guy or a couple guys, 2 guys that have been saying pretty much exactly the same things that Peter Zion has been saying in his book, The End of the World is Just a Beginning. The name of the book, their book, written in 1988, was or is The Fourth Turning. And what these two guys, Knew How and William Strauss, are saying, what they said 40 years ago was, the world, and especially the history of the United States of America, change in every chunk of 20 years. Every 20 years, there's something that changes America totally. And they call those 20 years a turn. So they say America has a cycle of 4 turns. We are now, right now, 2024, in the 4th turning. Another 4th turning, because it happened before 3 or 4 other times since 1776. So they say that the 4th turning is a moment of crisis, national crisis and global crisis, because if America as an empire upon the globe, when America has a crisis, the world has a crisis, right? So this is what they talk about in the book. So 1988, they write the book, The Fourth Turning, and then William Strauss passes. He died 3-4 years ago. And now Knew How comes out and he rewrites the book from 1988. And he says the new book is called The New Turning, The Fourth Turning is Here. So he talks about the accomplishment or the fulfillment of the 4th turning that they had written 40 years ago, and how it's going right now. And it is amazing that it is so close to what they wrote 40 years ago. They were so on point. And I believe that they received a supernatural spiritual inspiration to write that. They are smart guys, but that is the type of inspiration that you need to receive from a transcendent world, right? And I believe that they were somehow seeing things into the future that not many Christians, sadly, not many Christians did. Not many Christian leaders did. So I'm probably going to bring their book next week if nothing happens between now and then. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the week here, when we had this 5-day series on what happens if Trump goes back to the White House, meaning the end of globalization, or at least the acceleration of the end of a globalized world and a more nationalistic world, so on, from here onwards. For the 4 years of Trump, and then if he manages making that the 8 years of J.D. Vance or whatever happens. So this is where we are, and we should be praying and asking the Lord to inspire us, to give us the understanding of signs, and to understand the seasons and the times that we're living on or in right now, so that we can be a beacon of light and a source of instruction to people that are going to be completely lost out there, not knowing what to do. We have that possibility in Christ through the personhood of the Holy Spirit living inside of us. He will guide us toward all the truth. May God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend with you and your family. Go to church on Sunday. Share the word of God wherever you go. Be a beacon of light. Be salt. Be light. And may God bless you and your family. And I hope to see you here on Monday for episode 37 of the Anno Domini podcast. See you there.